happy to have you here with us, Lorna. Thank you very much for agreeing to meet with us and have a trialogue with us. So I first met Lorna probably in about 2015 when I was writing a book on conscious leaders. And then Lorna, you and I spoke one day. You were in a car on the way to the airport, and I was interviewing you, and we had this fabulous conversation that went everywhere, and it was fascinating, all about conscious leadership. And at the time, you were, I think, on the exec board at Danone in Paris, and you were heading up their manifesto to become a B Corp, large multinational B Corp. And Lorna had come from being chief exec of Kraft in China, and then went on to another big job as chief exec of Danone in US. So really, really big jobs. But all the time, I think there was this kind of question around leading more consciously, and you were certainly doing that work in Danone. And then you and I have done some work with B Corp leaders in Switzerland and with some female conscious leaders in New York. So there's been a lovely history for us of working together on this topic. And so I guess maybe the first thing to ask you would be how, from your perspective, how have things changed since I interviewed you in 2016? Because I know there have been some changes.
I was thinking about that in anticipation of this conversation, and one of my favorite quotes is from Joan Didion, the American writer, who says, "I've lost touch with a number of people that I used to be." And it feels like that. When I look back at 2016, I barely recognize that person, which is, I think it's true of all of us. We just sometimes are a little bit, we have a kind of a lag in who we think we are, and we're constantly changing and evolving. And I think that the biggest difference with respect to this conversation is that in 2015 and 16 and even 17, I still thought that muscling it wasn't a bad strategy. I thought that, like, my own personal determination could get a lot of stuff done. And yeah, I was waking up to another way of being, but I thought it was kind of an add-on, perhaps, and now it doesn't look like that to me at all. It looks like that the illusion of progress is still there when I'm muscling it, and we all do it at times. But true progress, true transformation is only ever in some sort of dance with universal wisdom, some kind of dance with something much bigger than our own personal selves. And so that's kind of how it looks to me now. And I realize that even as it comes out of my mouth, maybe it doesn't make all that much sense, but it does to me.
I think it does to us as well. I mean, I think the most extraordinary thing with you is coming from these roles and jobs. I mean, even as I introduced you, it's like big roles, big jobs, big form, right? Big titles. And into your realization that all of that is not really who you are, and then there's kind of much more fluid you coming through, and as you say, is kind of changing every day. But it's really interesting to me that you, although you've given up identification with the form of the role and the titles, you still play in the space of influencing as a conscious leader, although you no longer identify with that form and that title. And that's a very interesting evolution to have gone through.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the way that it looks to me is that innocently, I thought that that I would be happy if I were more powerful, more successful, more. And I was wrong, but that's okay. I mean, I was doing the best that I could. And the sort of unintentioned benefit of that is that I get to sit at some tables that I wouldn't otherwise sit at, perhaps. And so now I get to have conversations with people that that know that I understand their lived experience in a way that perhaps other people don't.
Yeah.
And so that's cool. And I think as I'm, these days I'm mostly a one-on-one coach, my craft is evolving as I managed, as I explore how to help people bridge their worlds, because people come from, we're all doing the best we can. And the people who are doing really big jobs, big, complicated jobs in a system that doesn't serve them, are, if they're willing to talk to me, then there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential to raise their consciousness, to raise the consciousness of the organizations that they work in. And I think that's really exciting. So, I went through a phase where I didn't want to hang out with my old world at all. I think I was a little bit scared of, slipping back or something, perhaps like when you stop drinking or something, maybe you don't want to have alcohol in your house. But then after a while, and now I'm really happy to talk to anybody about the journey of consciousness. And I think, you asked me in advance of this conversation, what does it mean? What does conscious leadership really mean? And I kept on thinking about the idea that people have that they're alone. One of the biggest things that I see with my clients is that they feel so alone, because they've sort of shrunk their sense of themselves to this little individual self. And when we know that when we're at our best, we are connected to all that is. And so this notion of connectedness or connection or collaboration, interdependence, call it whatever you will, is a sign of health in leadership to me now. When I see people knowing that they're much bigger than their little individual selves, I know that they're at ease and they're at their best, and that great solutions are going to come to them, and whatever happens to be confronting them will be seen for what it is, So, that's kind of how it occurs a lot day to day with me right now with leaders, is this sort of awareness that we're never alone.
Beautiful. Martin, what is that prompt in you? I'm going to bring you in at this point.
Oh, so many things that I could play with already and just would love to explore with you, Lorna. I'm really still interested to just explore your own journey a little bit more. And I call it sort of waking up. Is like, the shifting of layers of consciousness to wake up to a different way of being, thinking, living, leading in this world. And I'm curious to know what have been the key moments for you in your life of waking up, and what impact has that had for you?
I think everybody comes to this journey, in a unique way. And for me, I got everything that I thought I wanted. And then I discovered there wasn't anything there. And, you know, for many, many, many years, I thought I just had the sort of details of the equation wrong, you know. So I just needed this much money, I needed this kind of job, I needed this kind of man, I needed to be this size, I needed to live in this country, I needed this house, this car, whatever. And then I would get something and I would think, oh, well, I don't feel any better now. I wonder what I must have got the thing wrong. So let's just change the goal, you know. And in my particular case, it got ridiculous. You know, like how much more? How much more? You know, I moved. I was a big mover, you know, and in retrospect, physical mover. I've moved internationally 12 times. Calculated the other day, I've lived in like 40 houses or something. And in retrospect, there was some wisdom in that, because moving threw me off balance. I didn't know how to do things my old way. And so I was forced to open up and get curious about totally different ways of being. And that made me feel alive. That made me feel fresh. But I misunderstood, and I thought that it was the moving that was needed. And so every time I started to feel dull, I would move again. And now I realize that freshness is available to me now, here, right now, sitting on my couch in New York City. I don't have to go anywhere. It's about me and the universe and me and all of it. But my own personal journey was, because I'm conscious that I veer off from your questions here, but is that it got to a point where it became apparent to me that the fundamentals of the equation that I had in my head, this puzzle that I was trying to work out, that is life, that I had it wrong, that there must be another way. And I had been sort of searching always alongside my, you know, my sort of corporate world. I'd been on various, you know, tracks, meditation, you know, various things. But they were always sort of subsidiary to what I considered to be the main game puzzle. And I think, I mean, if you want a moment, there was definitely a moment that for me involves Michael Neal. So I was moving back to the US to take over the North American Danone business and make that a public benefit corporation and a B Corp. And I remember I was still living in Paris, and I was staying in this little hotel on the Upper East Side. And a friend of mine had sent me a podcast of Michael Neal's. And it said something like, if you're not feeling good, all that means is that you're on a train of thought that's not taking you anywhere helpful. And that's not a problem, because you just get off that train and get on the platform and wait for another train, because another thought will be along in a moment. And that struck me as true, like true, capital T. And I realized, oh my gosh, I take my thinking so seriously. And I think that all of my thoughts are equally important. And they're frankly not. I mean, I think we all think, what, 70,000 thoughts a day, something like that. 69,500 of them are low consciousness bullshit thoughts. Frankly, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast, but I just did. But now I know the difference. I know the difference, because when I'm thinking those kinds of thoughts, I'm not feeling good. My body's uncomfortable. I feel separate. I feel isolated. I feel low. The world looks complicated to me. But when I'm when I'm thinking creative, interesting, let's call them high frequency, high consciousness thoughts, anything's possible. And so that sort of technology, if you like, the way that I had misunderstood how we work, once I understood it, it was, everything changed. And again, in retrospect, there was wisdom running my life all the time. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I took credit for as a personal individual, I mean, really, now I see all of the ways in which I was supported and guided by something bigger than me and by other people. But the sort of it just looks completely different. It's like then they say when the scales fall from your eyes, looks completely different.
That's beautiful. I'm hearing two things in that for me. One is there's a shift in your relationship to what's going on in it psychologically, a shift in your relationship to your thinking that then has enabled you to be free from much of it. But the other one, the one that you started with, I find fascinating. This we think we grow up in this societal conditioning that we need to get somewhere and be something and have something for us to be happy. And I'm just seeing that as if that one thing is driving so much of the illness and issue in our world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, and one of the I think one of the challenges for us, I find it with my clients a lot, is that there's a barrage of noise that basically says one of two things, either together or either simultaneously or in sequence. Is there are all these things that you need to get outside that are going to make you happy, all of the obvious things. And then when all that doesn't go well, then it's all insights, and all inside psychological. So now I've got to spend a lot of time trying to work out where I got broken somewhere along the line. And so the sort of societal narrative that says our well-being is dependent on external factors and some sort of internal intellectual understanding of our upbringing, I think makes a dangerous and unhelpful cocktail that we live in. And when people settle down and they get to see how remarkable they are when they're settled, like right now, today, everything changes, and yet they often don't trust it because it's not what the world's telling them. It's not what their friends and family and the media and so on are telling them, So I think we're, in a way, we're fighting a system, but we've got truth on our side, I mean, it's funny because then I do a lot when I work with clients. I generally start with an intensive. I have a day or a day and a half, sometimes 2 days with them. And somebody said to me the other day, "What do you do in those intensives?" And it occurred to me in that moment to say, I want them to see by the end of our time together that their entire experience comes from the inside. And I want them to see that they are magnificent. magnificent, that they are God, that they are the entire potential of the universe. And mostly they do see that, and then they forget, and then they see, and then they forget, and then they see and they forget. But all of us know, we know at some level that that's what we are. It's true. So so yeah, I think that there is an unfortunate narrative, but here we are, people like you driving an alternative narrative.
I'd like to go next to this the system that doesn't support this, and then you're working on the bridge between the two worlds. So I'm wondering things like, let's start with inspiration. What are some of the leaders who are awake and conscious, but still operating in a system that's not very supportive, but they're still doing it brilliantly, to the point that you've been inspired by how they do it? And then I want to talk about how they do it.
Well, of course, I think that the old chestnut, which is an old chestnut for good reason, is Patagonia. I think Yvon Chouinard has provoked a conversation about what capitalism is and how it can and should be, that has been unparalleled. And I think that what he's done with his company is, breathtaking breakthrough. Having said that, he's actually deliberately kept it out of the mainstream system now, by keeping it private. And so I think that's where things get a lot trickier. So I sort of hang out. I do just enough sort of board work to stay engaged in the game, but the rest of the time is what my passion is, which is coaching now. But so I'm on the advisory board of Seventh Generation, and Seventh Generation is a wholly owned subsidiary of Unilever, and it is it's a B Corp, obviously as in that's the minimum. But they are it's a detergent company, and they are I think doing a really terrific job at not only trying to run a conscious, sustainable, and activist organization, but they're also trying to influence a much bigger system in Unilever. And I think the structure of that is interesting, because you've got the head of the global detergent business who's on the advisory board as well. And so I think this idea of sort of big organizations having small organizations within them that are trying to push the envelope and then trying to influence the big mothership, or is I think a useful model. And there are quite a few companies doing that. I mean, Danone is doing that also. And I think that we don't give enough credit to the people fighting inside or big organizations for a better way. So if you look at Peter Turkulva at Unilever, I mean, he's working really hard to double down on the R&D resources that are going to lead to making organic surfactants and making the things that we use to wash our clothes and so on sustainable. And I think inside many big companies, you've got some individuals who are doing a great job. So the woman who runs the organization, Alison, is doing a great job, and so Peter, I think, is too. I'm on the board of another organization which is not listed, but has multiple investors, called Guayaki, which is a yerba mate business. And yerba mate, for those of you who don't know, is a herbal drink from Latin America. And I think they're doing a really great job at trying to make sure that that the whole supply chain of yerba mate, all the way back to Latin America, is clean and clear and transparent. And again, I think there are some really interesting leaders in that space. If you take, I think, again, there are a lot of leaders who are not highly visible, but are working away inside their organizations to try and use their resources more responsibly. And I'm careful because there's sort of confidentiality issues around these things that I need to be careful about. But my overall point is by the time leaders come to our attention as sort of conscious leaders, they've been at it for a long time. I'm very interested in the ones who are kind of emerging, quietly working away, trying to be their best selves in an organization that really doesn't serve them.
Yeah.
In a system that doesn't serve them. Yeah.
I think that's so much what we're trying to do here. Is I feel so passionately about how can we provide space for people who think that, well, I think it's becoming less and less left field now, because as the context changes, sustainability is such a word. Conscious businesses, it's not the way it was even in 2016 when we first spoke. So it's much more front and center, but still that kind of, am I the only one? The feeling of, am I the only one, or where is my tribe? I think I feel so passionately about creating spaces for those leaders to come together to normalize that experience and learn from each other, and grow the way that they do things, because it seems to me to come down to decision making, right? You mentioned resources and what you do with resources. I still have a fundamental question about the bigger system. Is it possible to run a conscious business in a money-driven system, particularly publicly owned? Is it?
And the answer to your question is, I don't know. I mean, I think the jury is still out, because what I'm noticing is, really good words until backs are to the wall.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think it's kind of the wrong question for that reason. What I'm noticing is that when people are on this path, the question isn't really whether it's possible or not, because it's not a choice. The question is now, what do I do now? Where do I go now? How can I create now? And one of one of my clients is a entrepreneur, and I was meeting with her yesterday, and incredibly sustainable, like really extraordinary business that she's built. And she said, if I had known what I was letting myself in for, I wouldn't have started this thing, And of course, that's a very common reaction from all of us when we're in a difficult situation. We go, if I had known. But of course, that very spirit that wants to do stuff despite the odds is a really important part of the human condition. And so people who are in this space are passionate and determined to find a way for conscious businesses to and I don't think that there's a label like there's a conscious business, but it's sort of it infects who you are in a way that changes everything. And so I think we I don't think that we can kind of be arms folded, leaning back and deciding whether we're going to be conscious leaders or not. I mean, I think once you get into that game, you're in the game, and then you start getting curious about how best to be who you are and how best to bring your particular talents to the planet, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, if I look at my old boss, Emmanuel Faber, who was at Danone, and I see what he's doing now, which I don't know if you know what he's doing now, but he's the chair of ISSB, which is the organization now that is, excuse me, bringing environmental measures to the reporting requirements of all big businesses. And so, you know, when your kids are our age, in his vision and in their vision, you not only will have a global agreement on what profit and, you know, revenue and debt is, you'll have a global agreement on what carbon and social justice and pollution is, and you will be forced to report on it. And he has taken that on, and he took that on after doing some really interesting and bruising work at Danone, and now he's doing that. Because he's come to the conclusion that he wants to solve the problem at the regulatory level. And that's what people who are awake do. They find a way.
They find a way. I think your this is really helpful. The one when you said, "What can I create now?" I mean, it's got to be that, hasn't it? It's where are we now? Where am I today? What do I create now from the level of consciousness I'm at? And that's an evolving platform, or whatever we call it, all the way through.
Yeah, and I think once we see, you know, a lot of the things that have been created in the world have been created from the same energy that I was telling you I was using before, that, you know, once I get this thing, then I will feel better. And once we see that nothing makes us feel better, we start to create from a different place. You can still create completely magnificent things, but they just don't have the sort of, they don't have the weight that we put on them. And so I think, and I think healthy people who know how we work, do better. They do better things in the world by definition, you know, because they're not dumping all of their insecure thinking on some business that they've just created, you know.
So yeah. I'm really curious about that. I'm reflecting then on, so I'm working with a conscious entrepreneur at the moment who is passionate about doing some good in her particular sector by being very environmentally focused. And it's a sector where there's a lot of plastic used, and she's sort of attempting to sort of rid that entirely. And yet she's operating, she's exhausted. She's exhausted, she's applying her might, so on one level attempting to be conscious, and yet not necessarily consciously leading herself and from within the organization. And I'm curious, really, in your experience, Lorna, of all the people that we see who are attempting to do some good in the world, yet maybe coming from the wrong place in doing it, so their leadership might not be that great, or their sustainability because of their thinking.
Yeah, I think it's it's very common, and you know, it's like it can be, you know, an alternative way to be addicted in the same way as you were addicted to, you know, the old-fashioned things that you were trying to grab, right? So let's grab sustainability, and let's grab credibility in that area. And I think the signs that we're off track are the ones that I was mentioning earlier. And one of the most obvious ones is the feeling of being alone. That whenever I feel alone, I know my thinking is off. That's it. I know. And it's one of the earliest signs for me. I mean, I do poor me, Martha, if it weren't for me, I do that with the best of them. And I know that it's just a sign that I'm off. The first question is, who can I turn to help me here? How broadly can I share this challenge that I'm facing? Because once we ask ourselves that question, I mean, first of all, it's just a sign that you think he's off. It's okay, it'll pass. But it means that you've got other people engaged with you in the game, right? I mean, and it's interesting. I did a TED talk a couple of years ago about collaboration, and when I look back on that TED talk, I'm kind of embarrassed because I misunderstood a few things when I did the talk around. It was still very prescriptive around encouraging other people into your mission. And I think there are lots of other ways to do it now that I think about it. But the idea that in these particular days, of all days, that we are alone is clearly ludicrous. It is ludicrous. So in this particular case with this person, that just noticing that her thinking that she's alone means that she's off and she just needs to settle. And then from a settled place, how can I collect my tribe? And that's one of the things that I think is so surprising or so exciting about your organization, is that this might be a place where people come and, get their tribe, either a practical tribe or a short-term, let's have a conversation tribe. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how it looks to me right now.
So thank you. Yes, I think it does. I'm wondering what advice you might have to anybody listening to this. And this is quite a broad question, really, but just curious to what you say. Is what advice do you have to someone on the journey of conscious leadership, being a conscious leader or wanting to be more conscious in how they lead?
So I would say, welcome, because I would also say you're already there. I mean, the fact that you've decided that this is what you want means you're already there. And I love the poet David White. For those of you who, I don't know if you know him, but I love him very much. David, W-H-Y-T-E. And he talks about the fact that we are always well behind. Our sense of ourselves is always well behind where we actually are. He has a wonderful poem called The Road Beckoning, which sort of talks about how the you that you would like to be is calling you. She's already there. She's just, your idea of who you are is out of touch, out of date. So lean into this, lean into the you that's actually here, the one that's as conscious and as awake and as alive as you dream of being. And there's something about really knowing that I think shifts everything. I think the second thing that I would say is, I've just been seeing this lately in a way that really helps me. You know how in the sea you have the waves, the noisy waves. I know where you live, so Martin, so you've got the noisy waves, you can see them. And then there are, underneath that, there are kind of currents, which are sort of, moving backwards and forwards. And then at the very bottom of the sea, it's really, really still. And all of those are happening simultaneously. And the way that it looks to me is we have our busy, noisy thinking and the 70,000 thoughts and the blah, 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 blah. And then the currents for me are the sort of repetitive thoughts, the themes. You know, we all have themes, ones that we think relatively frequently. We have stories about ourselves. And then underneath that, we're completely still. And that can be that is happening at all times. And so sort of noticing the stillness in you is available to you like this. It's just in the noticing. It's not like a whole big thing. It's you don't have to have like in some kind of fancy practice or anything. It's right there, you know. And the dead giveaways, I just adore Bill Pettit. For those who don't know, Dr. Bill Pettit, he's a psychiatrist, and he has a bunch of really interesting stuff on YouTube. But he says there are 5 ways that you know that you're not home. One is your body's uncomfortable. Second is your mood is low. Third is your thinking is muddled. Fourth, the world looks really complicated. And fifth, you feel alone. So if any of those things are happening, it just means you're caught up. That's okay. Because in a nanosecond, you're back home. And so I love that little kind of checklist.
So
and I also love the fact that there's nowhere to go. I mean, we are it. It's like, you know, even the title or even the name, Conscious Leader, sounds like it's a thing. No, it's just like, it's more helpful for you to be leading while you're awake than when you're asleep. And so it might be more useful to be vertical and clothed. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's not a thing. It's not a big complicated thing. It's actually who you are. It's the reverse of how it looks.
I love that. I love that. I want to squeeze in one more question. Oh, you and I struggling with our flus. You were from this place that you're in, even though we're in the present now, right? What's your wisdom saying about what you're looking to create? Do you have a sense of what you're looking to create from that place of wisdom going forward the next X amount of time? I'm just curious about what you're inspired to create.
Well, it's interesting that you say this, because I just did a new website a couple of weeks back. And while I was working with the website person, it occurred to me that it was completely ridiculous to have my CV or my resume on that website. So I have nothing about my past on my website at all. I have to have a few little videos about the kinds of conversations I like to have with people. And it felt like so obvious. Like, why would I have my resume on my website? But it's common. And I noticed myself feeling really unhindered now, free. I'm like, yay, now what? Now that I've kind of chopped off this whole story about who I used to be, what's going to happen? And so, I mean, I noticed that I'm totally drawn towards working with women. So I put on that website, I'm interested in working with women who are up to big things, whatever that is. And I noticed just since I changed the website, you know, some people moving into my world that I'm delighted to be working with. So I don't know where that's going to lead, but I'm excited, and it feels like it's. I mean, I think that curiosity is a dead giveaway that you're open. Like, I don't know the answer to that question. I wonder what I'm going to create. I wonder what's going to get created. Whoa. So I think that's a giveaway that I'm kind of in good shape, you know, as I enter the new year. I'm not physically in good shape. I feel terrible. But
I think the curiosity is a great antidote to Bill Pettit's 5 things, which I think are brilliant. And so if you have curiosity, you know you're feeling alive, right?
Yeah,
and who knows what's
absolutely.
going to happen. Wow. Okay. So thank you, Lorna. I always love talking to you. Thank you so much for making some
Thank
time.
you both so much.
Thank you, Lorna. Awesome.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful holiday period and New Year,
Yeah.
and
Happy
I
holidays.
can't wait to see what you two are going to create. It's very exciting. I will keep my eye on ConsciousLeaders.Earth.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Lorna. Happy holidays.
All right. Take
Bye
care.
now.
Bye.
Bye.